The sound of my own front door slamming behind me echoed through the humid Tampa evening like a gunshot to my heart. At 68 years old, I never imagined I would be standing on my own porch, homeless in the house I had sacrificed everything to build. My name is Margaret Burke, and what you're about to hear is the story of how my own son tried to destroy me, and how I made sure he paid the ultimate price. "You're the biggest trash in this family. Get out of my life." The words still rang in my ears as I clutched my purse with trembling hands. Jason Burke, my 37-year-old son, had just thrown me out of the home I had worked 2 jobs for 20 years to pay off. The mortgage had cost me $180,000 over those decades, every penny scraped together from my nursing shifts and weekend cleaning jobs. And there he stood, his arm around Emily, his 32-year-old fiancée, both of them watching me like I was garbage they couldn't wait to see hauled away. I had raised Jason alone after his father died when Jason was only 12. I gave up my dreams of becoming a nurse practitioner, instead working double shifts as a registered nurse to keep us afloat. I sacrificed vacations, new clothes, social gatherings, everything to make sure he had what he needed. When he graduated from college, I handed him the deed to my house as a graduation gift, thinking I was securing his future. I thought I was being a loving mother. Tonight was supposed to be the celebration dinner for his upcoming wedding. Emily had been living in my house for 6 months now, and I had foolishly believed we were becoming a family. I had even offered to pay for part of their wedding, $15,000 from my retirement savings that I had been carefully nurturing for 15 years. But instead of gratitude, I found cruelty waiting for me at my own dinner table. "Jason, maybe we should talk about this calmly," I had suggested when Emily complained about my old lady habits of watching the evening news and keeping the air conditioning at a reasonable temperature. "No, Mom," Jason had snapped, his voice cold as ice. "Emily's right. You're suffocating us. This is our house now, and we don't need some bitter old woman making our lives miserable. Pack your things and leave." Tonight, Emily had smiled, actually smiled, as she watched my world crumble. "Maybe it's time you found yourself a nice little apartment somewhere more appropriate for someone your age." I looked at my son, searching his eyes for any trace of the little boy I had rocked to sleep during thunderstorms, the teenager I had cheered for at every baseball game, the young man I had helped through college heartbreaks and career struggles. But all I saw was a stranger wearing my son's face. The silence stretched between us like a chasm that 25 years of love couldn't bridge. I could have begged, I could have cried, I could have reminded him of everything I had sacrificed. Instead, I did something that surprised even myself. I stayed completely silent. I picked up my purse, walked to my car with my head held high, and drove away from the life I had built. But as I sat in that parking lot at the 24-hour diner down the street, my hands finally stopped trembling. Because I realized something that Jason and Emily had no idea about. I might have given him the deed, but I had kept something far more powerful. I made only 2 calls that night, 2 simple phone calls that would change everything. The first call was to my lawyer, Patricia Morrison, who had handled the deed transfer and knew exactly what Jason didn't. The second call was to my bank, where I had been a loyal customer for 30 years. As I hung up the phone after that second call, I actually smiled for the first time in months. Jason and Emily thought they had won. They thought they could discard me like an old piece of furniture they no longer needed. They had no idea that their perfect little wedding, scheduled for this coming Saturday at the Riverside Country Club, was about to become their worst nightmare. Tomorrow, when Jason tried to pay for their wedding buffet, the $12,000 reception he had been bragging about to all his friends, he would discover that throwing out Margaret Burke had been the biggest mistake of his miserable life. The nightmare was just beginning. If this story is gripping you as much as it gripped me to live through it, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear how this all unfolds. And leave me a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love connecting with people from all over the world who understand that sometimes justice has to be served cold. Saturday morning dawned bright and merciless over Tampa Bay. While I sipped my coffee in my temporary hotel room at the Hampton Inn, I couldn't help but imagine the chaos that was about to unfold at the Riverside Country Club. Jason and Emily had no idea that their perfect wedding day was about to become a masterclass in consequences. I had spent the week quietly moving my belongings into a storage unit and setting up my temporary living situation. But more importantly, I had been making calls, lots of calls. You see, when you work in a hospital for 30 years, you meet a lot of people. Lawyers, accountants, business owners, even a few judges. And when you've been as generous and kind as I had been over the decades, people remember. Patricia Morrison, my lawyer, had been surprisingly eager to help once I explained the full situation. "Margaret," she had said during our Thursday meeting, "what your son did was not just cruel, it was legally questionable. Let's make sure he understands exactly what he's lost." The deed transfer I had made to Jason as a graduation gift had been my biggest mistake, but it wasn't my only move. You see, I had kept the mortgage in my name. Jason's name was on the deed, but Margaret Burke was still the one legally responsible for that $180,000 debt. And after 30 years of perfect payment history, the bank trusted my judgment completely. At exactly 11:30 a.m., while the wedding guests were probably arriving at the country club and Emily was getting her hair done, my phone rang. "Mrs. Burke?" It was David Chen from First Tampa National Bank. "Everything is in motion, just as you requested." "Thank you, David. I appreciate your discretion in this matter." "Ma'am, after 30 years of your business and the way you handled your late husband's affairs, you've earned our complete trust. The automatic payment suspension is now active and we've flagged the account as requested." I felt a strange mix of sadness and satisfaction. This wasn't about money. It was about respect. It was about showing my son that the woman he had discarded like trash had built the very foundation he was standing on. At 3:47 p.m., my phone rang again. This time it was Jason, and I could hear the panic in his voice even before he spoke. Mom, there's some kind of mistake with the credit card. The caterer is saying the payment was declined. The wedding starts in 2 hours." I took a slow sip of my iced tea and waited 3 full seconds before responding. "Hello, Jason. I hope you're having a lovely wedding day." "Mom, this isn't funny. Emily is freaking out. The caterer won't serve dinner without payment, and our credit card was declined. We need $12,000 right now." "That's a significant amount of money, Jason. I remember when $12,000 seemed like a fortune to me. That was about what I made in 4 months when you were in high school, working those double shifts to keep us afloat." "Mom, please. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it later. Emily's crying, and all her family is here. You have to help us." The irony was almost too perfect. 3 days ago, this same man had called me trash and thrown me out of my own home. Now, he was begging for my help. "Jason, I'm afraid I don't have access to the funds you need. You see, when you threw me out of the house, I had to make some adjustments to my finances. I suspended all automatic payments from my accounts to protect myself during this transition." There was a long silence. I could hear Emily's voice in the background, shrill and demanding. I could picture the scene. The elegant country club, the beautiful decorations, the guests in their fancy clothes, all waiting for a reception that wasn't going to happen. "What do you mean you suspended payments?" "Well, Jason, when you told me to get out of your life, I realized I needed to protect myself financially. So I called the bank and suspended all automatic transactions, including the mortgage payment, the property insurance, and yes, the credit card that was linked to my account, the one you apparently planned to use for your wedding expenses." The sound he made was somewhere between a gasp and a choke. You mean the credit card we've been using is connected to my account, yes. The account you told me to take with me when I left, so I did. "But Mom, we can't pay for anything. The flowers, the photographer, the DJ, everything was supposed to be paid today." I stood up and walked to my hotel room window, looking out at the beautiful Tampa skyline. Somewhere out there, my son was learning one of life's hardest lessons. "Jason, you made it very clear that you didn't want me in your life. You called me trash. You humiliated me in front of Emily. You threw me out of the house I worked 20 years to pay for. Did you really think I would continue funding your lifestyle after that? This is insane. You're ruining my wedding." "No, sweetheart. You ruined it the moment you forgot that the woman you were throwing away was the same woman who built everything you've been taking for granted." The line went quiet, except for the sound of Emily sobbing in the background and guests murmuring with growing concern. Monday morning arrived like a storm cloud over Jason's perfectly planned life. I sat in Patricia Morrison's law office, reviewing documents that would change everything. Patricia had worked all weekend, and the determination in her eyes matched the fire that had been growing in my chest since that horrible Thursday night. "Margaret, are you absolutely certain about this course of action?" Patricia asked, her fingers drumming on the mahogany desk. Once we file these papers, there's no going back. I thought about Emily's smug smile as she watched me leave my own home. I thought about Jason's words, "You're the biggest trash in this family." I thought about the 20 years I spent working double shifts to pay for that house, the $180,000 in mortgage payments, the countless sacrifices I had made. Patricia, I've been certain since the moment my son forgot that respect is earned, not owed. The wedding had been a complete disaster. After the catering fiasco, the photographer had refused to continue without payment. The DJ had packed up his equipment. The beautiful floral arrangements had been repossessed by the florist when their credit card was declined. Emily's family had watched in horror as their perfect daughter's dream wedding crumbled around them. But that was just the beginning. "The eviction notice is ready," Patricia said, sliding a thick document across the desk. "Since your name is still on the mortgage and Jason has defaulted on the payment schedule you established when you transferred the deed, you have grounds to reclaim the property." "But his name is on the deed," Patricia smiled grimly. "Yes, but there's something called a mortgage clause in the original deed transfer. You retained the right to reclaim the property if mortgage payments weren't maintained. Jason never read the fine print when he signed those papers. He was too excited about getting a free house. My phone had been ringing constantly since Saturday night. 15 missed calls from Jason, 8 from Emily, and even 3 from Emily's mother, who I had never liked anyway. I had ignored them all. At 2:30 p.m. my phone rang again. This time I answered. "Mom, we need to talk." Jason's voice was different now, smaller, frightened. "I'm listening." "Emily left. She called off the engagement. She's moving back in with her parents." I felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, but then I remembered the look on Emily's face when she called me a bitter old woman. "I'm sorry to hear that, Jason." "No, you're not. You planned this. You deliberately ruined my wedding." "I didn't ruin anything, sweetheart. I simply stopped enabling your disrespect." "Mom, please. I know I said some terrible things. I was stressed about the wedding, and Emily was pressuring me, and I lost my temper." "You lost your temper?" "Jason, you threw your mother out of her own home and called her trash. That's not a temper tantrum. That's a character revelation." There was a long pause. When Jason spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What do you want me to do?" I looked at Patricia, who nodded encouragingly. We had prepared for this moment. "Jason, I want you to understand something. When you signed those papers accepting the deed to my house, you also accepted responsibility for maintaining it according to the terms I established. You've now missed your first mortgage payment, which was due yesterday." "But Mom, I don't have $1,800. The wedding disaster wiped out our savings, and Emily was contributing to the household expenses. I can't make the payment." "Then I suggest you find a way, because according to the legal documents you signed, failure to maintain the mortgage schedule gives me the right to reclaim the property." The silence that followed was so long, I thought he might have hung up. "You're going to take the house back?" "Jason, I worked for 20 years to pay off that mortgage. I gave you that house as a gift because I loved you and wanted to help you build a future. But gifts come with responsibilities, and respect is the minimum payment required. So what happens now?" Patricia gestured to the stack of papers on her desk. Legal documents, eviction notices, property reclamation forms. Everything needed to undo the biggest mistake I had ever made. "Now you have 30 days to bring the mortgage current or find alternative housing. The same 30 days notice that any other tenant would receive." "Tenant? Mom, I'm your son." "Yes, you are. And I'm the mother you called trash and threw out of her own home. It seems we're both learning some hard truths about who we really are." When I hung up the phone, Patricia was already preparing the papers for filing. But my phone rang again immediately. "Mrs. Burke?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional. "This is Marcus Webb from Tampa Bay Legal Services. I'm calling on behalf of Jason Burke. I understand there may be some irregularities in a recent property transaction." I smiled and handed the phone to Patricia. Let Jason hire all the lawyers he wanted. He was about to learn that when you bite the hand that fed you for 37 years, that hand might just be strong enough to bite back. The real war was just beginning. The next 2 weeks brought revelations that even I hadn't anticipated. Sitting in my hotel room, reviewing bank statements and legal documents, I began to understand the full scope of how deeply Jason and Emily had planned to exploit my generosity. What I discovered made their cruelty even more calculated than I had imagined. My accountant, Robert Flores, whom I had known since my husband's death 15 years ago, had spent days analyzing Jason's financial activities since I transferred the deed. What he found was staggering. "Margaret, you need to see this," Robert said during our Wednesday meeting, spreading papers across his desk like he was dealing cards in a poker game where the stakes were my entire life savings. "Jason has been using the house as collateral for loans, significant loans." My stomach dropped. "What kind of loans?" "He took out a home equity line of credit for $45,000 just 2 months ago. The paperwork lists home improvements and wedding expenses, but I've traced the money, and most of it went to pay off his credit card debt and buy Emily's engagement ring, a $12,000 diamond that he charged to 3 different credit cards. $45,000. I felt dizzy. That was more than I made in an entire year when Jason was in high school. "But Robert, how could he do that without my signature? My name is still on the mortgage." Robert's expression was grim. "That's where this gets interesting. He forged your signature on the loan documents." The room seemed to spin around me. My own son, the boy I had raised, the man I had sacrificed everything for, had committed fraud using my home as collateral. "There's more, Margaret. Emily isn't who you think she is." He handed me another document, a credit report that made my blood run cold. "Emily Sullivan has been married twice before. Both marriages ended in divorce, and both times she walked away with significant financial settlements. She's currently being sued by her second ex-husband for hiding assets during their divorce proceedings." I stared at the papers, trying to process what I was reading. "You're telling me that she's a professional, what? Gold digger?" "I'm telling you that she has a pattern of targeting financially stable men, marrying them, and extracting as much money as possible before moving on. Jason wasn't her first victim. He was just her latest mark." The pieces began falling into place like dominoes in reverse. Emily's sudden interest in Jason after he inherited my house, her insistence on an expensive wedding, her constant complaints about my presence in their home. She hadn't wanted to marry Jason. She had wanted to marry my house. My phone rang, interrupting my racing thoughts. Jason again. "Mom, we need to talk. In person." "I think we've said everything that needs to be said, Jason. Please, I have something to show you, something about Emily that you need to know." Despite everything, the desperation in his voice touched something maternal in my chest. "All right, but we meet in public. The Starbucks on Dale Mabry. In 1 hour." When I walked into that coffee shop, I almost didn't recognize my son. Jason looked like he had aged 5 years in 2 weeks. His hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that reminded me of the sleepless nights I had endured when his father was dying. "Mom," he said, standing when he saw me, "thank you for coming." I sat across from him, noting how his hands shook slightly as he arranged a stack of papers on the small table between us. "What is this about, Jason?" He took a shaky breath. "Emily. Emily wasn't who I thought she was. After the wedding disaster, I started going through her things, trying to figure out how we could fix everything. I found these." He handed me a folder filled with documents, bank statements showing transfers of large sums of money to accounts in Emily's name only, love letters from 2 different men, both significantly older, both wealthy. Most damning of all, a printed email conversation between Emily and someone named Rachel, discussing the Burke situation. "Read the one on top," Jason said, his voice barely audible. I read aloud. "Rachel, the old lady is finally gone. Jason did exactly what we planned, threw her out like garbage. Now we just need to get through this stupid wedding, and then we can put the house up for sale. The Tampa market is hot right now. Jason thinks we're going to live here forever, but I'm thinking 6 months max before I find a reason to leave him. I should be able to walk away with at least half the house value, maybe more if I play it right." My hands were trembling as I set the paper down. "Jason, how long had this been going on?" "I think from the very beginning. Mom, I think she targeted me specifically because she knew about the house. She knew you had transferred the deed, and she saw an opportunity." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I saw not the cruel man who had thrown me out, but the naive boy who had been manipulated by someone far more calculating than either of us had realized. "Jason, this doesn't excuse what you said to me, what you did. I know." Tears were streaming down his face now. "Mom, I was an idiot. Emily had been working on me for months, telling me that you were trying to control our relationship, that you didn't respect our independence. She made me feel like I had to choose between her and you, and I chose wrong. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. Emily had played us both. She had manipulated Jason into believing I was the problem while secretly planning to steal everything we both had worked for. What do you want from me, Jason? He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. I want to make this right. I want to stop Emily before she ruins someone else's family. And Mom, I want my mother back. I looked at this broken man across from me, and I realized that sometimes justice and mercy have to find a way to coexist. But first, we had to deal with Emily Sullivan, because she was about to learn that she had picked the wrong family to destroy. By Thursday morning, Robert Flores had traced Emily's financial activities back 3 years, and what we discovered was a criminal enterprise that had been operating under everyone's noses. Emily Sullivan wasn't just a gold digger. She was running a sophisticated marriage fraud scheme that had already destroyed at least 2 other families. Patricia Morrison's office had become our war room. Maps, financial records, legal documents, and photographs covered every available surface. We looked like detectives investigating a major crime, which, as it turned out, we were. Margaret, this is bigger than we thought, Patricia said, pointing to a timeline she had created on her whiteboard. Emily has been systematically targeting middle-aged men who have recently inherited property or come into money. Jason was victim number 3. What happened to the others? Her first husband, David Kim, inherited a family restaurant worth $200,000. After 18 months of marriage, Emily filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, and walked away with half of everything. The restaurant had to be sold to pay the settlement. I felt sick. And the second husband? Michael Torres inherited his mother's house in Orlando. Emily convinced him to refinance the property to invest in their future together. She disappeared with $60,000 from the refinancing, leaving him with a massive mortgage he couldn't afford. He lost the house to foreclosure. Jason, who had been sitting quietly in the corner of Patricia's office, finally spoke up. She showed me articles about successful couples who invested in their relationship by leveraging property assets. She made it seem romantic, like we were building something together. Patricia nodded grimly. She's very good at what she does, but she made one critical mistake this time. What mistake? She underestimated Margaret Burke. My phone rang. Emily's number appeared on the screen. She's been calling for 3 days, I told Patricia. Should I answer? Put it on speaker. Let's hear what she has to say, I answered. Hello, Emily? Mrs. Burke. Emily's voice was syrupy sweet, the same tone she had used during our first meeting 6 months ago. I've been trying to reach you. I think there's been some terrible misunderstanding. I'm listening. Jason told me about the mortgage situation, and I think there might be some confusion about the payment dates. I'd love to sit down with you and Jason and work this out. After all, we're going to be family. Patricia was scribbling notes. She doesn't know Jason found the emails. Emily, I was under the impression that you had called off the engagement. There was a brief pause. Oh, that. Well, you know how emotional wedding planning can be. Jason and I have worked through our little disagreement. We're stronger than ever. I looked at Jason, whose face had gone white. Even after everything that had happened, hearing Emily lie so casually about their relationship was clearly devastating for him. Where are you staying now, Emily? I'm back at the house, of course. Jason realized that he made a mistake asking me to leave. We're planning a simple courthouse wedding next week, and then we want to have a proper conversation with you about the financial arrangements. Patricia wrote, she's moved back in. She thinks she still has control. Emily, that's interesting, because Jason is sitting right here in my lawyer's office, and he hasn't mentioned any reconciliation. The silence that followed was electric. I could practically hear Emily's mind racing, trying to figure out how much we knew. Well, Jason is probably just embarrassed about the whole situation. You know how men are about admitting they were wrong. Emily, let me ask you something. How many times have you been married? Another pause, longer this time. I don't see how that's relevant to our current situation. Answer the question. This will be my first marriage. The lie came out smooth as silk, but Patricia was already holding up the divorce records from Emily's previous 2 marriages. Emily, I'm going to give you one chance to tell the truth. How many times have you been married? Mrs. Burke, I think you've been given some bad information. Maybe we should meet in person to clear up these misunderstandings. I have divorce records from David Kim and Michael Torres. I have bank statements showing money transfers to accounts in your name only. I have printed emails discussing your plans to sell my house and abandon my son. What I don't have is patience for any more lies." The line went dead. Patricia immediately picked up her office phone. "Time to make some calls. Margaret, we're going to need the police involved in this." "Police? Forgery? Fraud? Conspiracy to commit theft. Emily has committed multiple felonies. But more importantly, if she's back in your house, she's there illegally. Jason never had the right to let her move back in, because legally, she has no claim to the property." "What does that mean?" Patricia smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from her in weeks. "It means we can have her arrested for criminal trespass. Today." Jason stood up. "I want to be there when it happens." "Jason, that might not be—" "Mom, I need to see this through. I need to face what I allowed to happen, and I need Emily to know that she didn't just fool some stupid guy. She messed with the wrong family." I looked at my son, seeing determination in his eyes that reminded me of the little boy who used to insist on helping me carry groceries even when the bags were bigger than he was. "All right," I said, "let's go get our house back." At 4:17 p.m. on Thursday, 2 Tampa Police Patrol cars pulled into the driveway of 1247 Mockingbird Lane, the house I had worked 20 years to pay off, the house I had given to my son as a gift, the house that Emily Sullivan thought she could steal. Detective Maria Santos, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who reminded me of the head nurse I used to work with in the ICU, had reviewed all of Patricia's evidence that morning. The forgery charges alone were enough to put Emily away for years, but the systematic pattern of marriage fraud elevated this to a federal case. "Mrs. Burke," Detective Santos had said during our briefing, "I've been investigating financial crimes for 12 years, and this woman is one of the most sophisticated con artists I've ever seen. She's been operating this scheme across 3 states. Now, standing on my own front lawn with Jason beside me and Patricia holding a folder full of legal documents, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. This should have been my son's wedding day. Instead, it was the day he learned that love can be a weapon in the wrong hands." Emily opened the front door before we even knocked, clearly having seen the police cars through the window. She was dressed in one of her expensive outfits, a designer dress that probably cost more than I used to make in a month, and her makeup was perfect, as always, but her eyes gave her away. For the first time since I'd known her, Emily Sullivan looked genuinely afraid. "Jason," she said, her voice bright and artificial. "What's going on? Why are the police here?" Jason stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice was steady and cold. "They're here for you, Emily." Detective Santos took out her badge. "Ms. Sullivan, I'm Detective Santos with Tampa PD. We need to speak with you about several matters. May we come inside?" Well, this isn't really a good time. Jason and I were just discussing our wedding plans." "Emily," I said quietly, "there isn't going to be a wedding." She turned to look at me, and for a moment her mask slipped completely. The sweet, innocent girl Jason had fallen in love with disappeared, replaced by someone cold and calculating. "You bitter old witch," she hissed. "You couldn't stand to see Jason happy, could you? You had to destroy everything because you're jealous that he chose me over you." "Actually," Patricia stepped forward, "Jason never chose you. You chose Jason because he had access to a $250,000 property and a mother naive enough to sign it over as a gift." Emily's face went white. "I don't know what you think you know, but we know about David Kim," Detective Santos interrupted. "We know about Michael Torres. We know about the $60,000 you stole from the Orlando property refinancing. We know about the forged signature on the home equity loan. Would you like me to continue?" Emily's composure cracked completely. "Jason, tell them this is crazy. Tell them I love you." Jason pulled a folded paper from his pocket, one of the emails Emily had written to her friend Rachel. He read aloud, "The old lady is finally gone. Jason did exactly what we planned, threw her out like garbage. Now we just need to get through this stupid wedding, and then we can put the house up for sale." Emily's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air. "Jason thinks we're going to live here forever," Jason continued, "but I'm thinking 6 months max before I find a reason to leave him. I should be able to walk away with at least half the house value, maybe more if I play it right." "You went through my private emails." Emily's voice was shrill now, desperate. "That's invasion of privacy." "Actually," Detective Santos said calmly, When someone commits fraud using forged documents, their communications become evidence in a criminal investigation. Ms. Sullivan, you're under arrest for forgery, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. As Detective Santos read Emily her rights, I watched my son's face. He wasn't angry anymore. He just looked tired and sad and older than his 37 years. "Jason," Emily called out as the handcuffs clicked into place, "don't let them do this. I love you. Everything I did was for us." Jason shook his head. "Emily, you never loved me. You loved what you thought you could take from me. There's a difference." As they led Emily to the patrol car, she turned back one last time. "This isn't over, Margaret. You'll pay for this. All of you will pay." I watched the police car disappear down Mockingbird Lane, taking with it the woman who had nearly destroyed my family. But instead of feeling triumphant, I felt exhausted. "Mom," Jason said quietly, "I am so sorry." I looked at my son, my only child, the boy I had loved unconditionally for 37 years, the man who had called me trash and thrown me out of my own home. "Jason, I know you are. But sorry doesn't fix 20 years of trust that was shattered in one night." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "What happens now?" I looked at the house, my house, with its freshly painted shutters and the garden I had planted when Jason was in high school. "Now we figure out if there's anything left to rebuild." Patricia touched my arm gently. "Margaret, there's something else you should know. The FBI wants to speak with you. Emily's scheme is much bigger than just 3 marriages. You may have helped catch someone who's been destroying families for years." As we walked back toward my house, and it was my house again, legally and completely, I realized that this story was far from over. Emily Sullivan might be in custody, but the damage she had done would take years to undo. The question was my relationship with Jason damaged beyond repair, or was there still hope for healing? The FBI field office in Tampa looked exactly like every crime drama I had ever watched. Sterile, intimidating, and filled with serious people in dark suits who spoke in acronyms. Special Agent Rebecca Foster, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s, had been investigating what she called romance fraud rings for the past 5 years. "Mrs. Burke," Agent Foster said as she led Jason and me into a conference room, "your case has broken open an investigation we've been working on for 2 years. Emily Sullivan is part of a network of con artists who target inheritance recipients and recent widows across the southeastern United States." The table was covered with photographs, financial records, and what looked like a family tree connecting dozens of people. I recognized Emily's photo immediately, but there were at least 8 other women whose pictures were linked to hers with red string. "How many victims are there?" Jason asked, his voice hoarse. He hadn't slept well since Emily's arrest 3 days ago. "We've identified 37 confirmed victims over the past 4 years, Agent Foster replied. "The total financial damage is approaching $2 million. $2 million. I felt dizzy thinking about how many lives had been destroyed, how many families had been torn apart by these predators. "How does it work?" I asked. Agent Foster pulled out a flowchart that looked like a military operation. "They call it inheritance targeting. The network has scouts who monitor obituaries, property transfers, and divorce settlements. When someone inherits property or receives a significant insurance payout, they become a target." She pointed to Emily's photograph. "Emily specializes in men aged 35 to 50 who have recently inherited real estate. She has profiles on 12 different dating websites, each one carefully crafted to appeal to different demographics." Jason was staring at Emily's dating profiles with the expression of someone watching his own funeral. "Look at this," he said, pointing to one of the screenshots. "This is exactly what she told me during our first date, that she was looking for a genuine man who values family and stability. It's all scripted," Agent Foster explained. "They have playbooks for every scenario. Emily was following a specific protocol designed to separate you from your support system, in this case, your mother, while gaining legal access to your assets." I thought about all the little conversations Emily had initiated over the months, how she had gradually convinced Jason that I was interfering in their relationship. "She knew exactly what she was doing," I said. "Every argument, every complaint about me. It was all planned." "Most likely, yes. The psychological manipulation is often more devastating than the financial theft. We've had victims who struggle to trust anyone for years afterward." Agent Foster opened another file. "Mrs. Burke, we need to discuss your role in this investigation. You've provided us with more evidence against this network than we've been able to gather in 2 years of investigation. What kind of role? We want you to testify before a federal grand jury. Your case is unique because you fought back successfully. Most victims don't realize they've been conned until it's too late to recover their losses. I looked at Jason, who was still studying the dating profiles with horrified fascination. What would that involve? You would need to provide detailed testimony about Emily's methods, the timeline of her relationship with Jason, and the financial crimes you uncovered. Your accountant and lawyer have already agreed to cooperate. And Jason? Jason would also testify about the psychological manipulation techniques Emily used. His testimony could help us establish patterns that apply to other victims. Jason looked up from the photographs. Will this help other people? The people she's already hurt? Potentially, yes. If we can get convictions on the federal charges, we can pursue asset recovery for previous victims. Some of the money might be recoverable. I thought about David Kim losing his family restaurant, about Michael Torres losing his mother's house. Agent Foster, how long will this take? The grand jury hearings could begin as early as next month. The trial, if there is one, might not happen for another year. But Mrs. Burke, I want you to understand something. This network has been operating with impunity for years. Your case might be the key to shutting them down permanently. Jason reached across the table and took my hand. The first physical contact we'd had since that terrible Thursday night. Mom, I want to do this. I want to help stop them from hurting other families. His hand felt the same as it had when he was a little boy, afraid of thunderstorms, reaching for his mother's comfort. But we weren't the same people we had been 2 weeks ago. Too much had been broken. Too many trust had been shattered. There's something else, Agent Foster said. Emily has been trying to make contact with Jason from jail. She's been calling collect 3 times a day. I haven't accepted any of her calls, Jason said quickly. Good, don't. But we think she's going to try to negotiate some kind of plea deal by offering information about the other network members. If she does, you might be contacted by her defense attorney. What should we do if that happens? Refer everything to the prosecutor's office. Don't engage with Emily or her representatives directly. Remember, manipulation is what she does best. As we left the FBI building, I felt the weight of what we were about to undertake. This wasn't just about getting justice for what Emily had done to our family. It was about protecting other families from being destroyed the same way. Mom, Jason said as we reached my rental car, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think we can ever get back to the way things were? Before Emily, before everything went wrong? I looked at my son, and I realized that he was asking the wrong question. The way things were before Emily had allowed her to nearly destroy us. Maybe the real question wasn't whether we could go back, but whether we could find a way forward that was stronger than what we'd lost. Jason, I don't think we can go back, but maybe, if we're willing to do the work, we can build something better. He nodded, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw hope in his eyes. 6 weeks later, I found myself walking into the federal courthouse in downtown Tampa, wearing my best navy blue dress, the one I had bought for Jason's college graduation 13 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was wearing a celebration dress to testify about the worst betrayal of my life. The grand jury hearing had been scheduled for 10 a.m., but I had been awake since 4:30, rehearsing my testimony and trying to calm the butterflies in my stomach. Jason met me outside the courthouse at 9:45, looking as nervous as I felt. You ready for this, Mom? As ready as I'll ever be. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chen, a serious young man who reminded me of the residents I used to work with at the hospital, had prepared me extensively for this moment. Mrs. Burke, just tell the truth exactly as you experienced it. The grand jury needs to understand how sophisticated this criminal operation was. The grand jury room was smaller than I had expected, filled with 23 ordinary-looking people who could have been my neighbors or former patients. They listened intently as I told my story, from the night Emily convinced Jason to throw me out of my house to the moment we discovered her emails detailing her plans to steal everything we had. Mrs. Burke, one of the jurors asked, how did you know to investigate Ms. Sullivan's background? I didn't, initially. I just knew that something was wrong with how quickly my son's attitude toward me had changed. A mother knows her child, even when that child is 37 years old. Ito. When did you realize this was more than just a relationship problem? When my accountant traced the money and discovered that Jason had taken out a home equity loan using forged documents, that's when I understood that Emily wasn't just trying to separate us emotionally. She was systematically planning to steal everything we had. Another juror raised her hand. Were you surprised by your son's behavior during this period? I paused, thinking about how to answer honestly. I was heartbroken. Jason had never spoken to me the way he did that night. But looking back, I can see how Emily manipulated him psychologically. She isolated him from me gradually, making him believe that I was the problem in their relationship. How did that manipulation work? Small things over months. Comments about how I was set in my ways or didn't respect their independence. She made him feel like he had to choose between loyalty to his mother and loyalty to his fiancé. When someone you love puts you in that position repeatedly, it changes you. Jason testified after me, and I watched from the gallery as he described the months of psychological manipulation he had endured. His voice broke when he talked about the night he threw me out. I knew it was wrong even as I was doing it, he said, but Emily had convinced me that my mother was trying to control our relationship. She made me believe that the only way to prove my commitment to her was to choose her over my family. How do you feel about that decision now? The prosecutor asked. It was the worst mistake of my life. I nearly lost the most important person in my world because I believed someone who was using me to commit crimes. The defense attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Rebecca Walsh, cross-examined Jason with surgical precision. Mr. Burke, isn't it true that you willingly signed the home equity loan documents? Yes, and isn't it true that you willingly asked your mother to leave the house? Yes, but Emily manipulated. So you admit that you made these decisions voluntarily? I made them because I was being psychologically manipulated by someone who was running a criminal enterprise. But they were still your decisions, weren't they? I watched my son struggle with this question, and I realized that this was the heart of what we were both grappling with. Emily had manipulated Jason, but Jason had still chosen to hurt me. The manipulation explained his behavior, but it didn't excuse it. After the grand jury session, Agent Foster found us in the courthouse hallway. How do you think it went? I asked. Very well. The jury seemed engaged, and your testimony was compelling. We should know within a week whether they'll vote to indict. What happens if they do indict? Then we move to trial. Emily will probably try to negotiate a plea deal at that point, but given the scope of the charges and the number of victims involved, the prosecutor isn't likely to accept anything less than significant prison time. As we walked to the parking garage, Jason was unusually quiet. What are you thinking about? I asked. That defense attorney was right, wasn't she? I did make those decisions voluntarily. Emily might have manipulated me, but I still chose to believe her lies instead of trusting the woman who raised me. I stopped walking and turned to face my son. Jason, Emily is a professional criminal. She's been perfecting these manipulation techniques for years. You weren't her first victim, and unfortunately, you probably won't be her last. But Mom, I should have known better. I should have seen through her lies. Should have, could have, would have. Those phrases don't change anything. What matters now is what we do going forward. Do you think we can get past this? Really? I looked at Jason, my son, Emily's victim, the man who had called me trash and thrown me out of my own home, and I realized that forgiveness wasn't a destination. It was a process, and it was going to take time. I think we can try, I said. But Jason, trust is like a china plate. Once it's broken, you can glue it back together, but the cracks will always be visible. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I can live with visible cracks, Mom. I just want the chance to try to repair what I broke. 3 days later, Agent Foster called with the news. The grand jury had voted to indict Emily Sullivan on 14 federal charges, including mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. The trial was scheduled to begin in 4 months. Justice was coming, but healing, that was going to take much longer. 4 months later, I sat in the federal courthouse again, but this time as a witness in United States versus Emily Sullivan. The courtroom was packed with other victims of Emily's network, their faces reflecting the same mixture of anger and betrayal that I had been living with for months. Emily looked different now, thinner, paler, wearing a conservative gray suit that made her look like a completely different person than the manipulative woman who had nearly destroyed my family. Her lawyer, Rebecca Walsh, had clearly coached her to appear vulnerable and remorseful. Your Honor, Walsh said during her opening statement. My client was herself a victim of an abusive childhood that left her unable to form healthy relationships. Emily Sullivan is not a criminal mastermind. She's a damaged woman who made terrible decisions while trying to escape a cycle of poverty and abuse. I glanced at Jason, who was sitting beside me in the gallery. He looked skeptical, and I was proud of him for that. 6 months ago, he might have fallen for Emily's victim narrative. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chen's opening was much more straightforward. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Emily Sullivan is a career criminal who has systematically destroyed families across 3 states. She used sophisticated psychological manipulation and document forgery to steal nearly $2 million from 37 victims. This is not a story about a damaged woman making poor choices. This is a story about a predator who targeted vulnerable people for financial gain. The trial lasted 2 weeks, and every day brought new revelations about the scope of Emily's crimes. Witnesses testified about losing family homes, businesses, and life savings. A woman named Patricia Torres took the stand to describe how Emily's theft of her brother Michael's inheritance had led to his suicide 6 months after he lost their mother's house. Michael never recovered from the betrayal, Patricia testified through tears. He blamed himself for being foolish enough to trust someone who claimed to love him. The house was all he had left of our mother, and when he lost it, he felt like he had dishonored her memory. I felt Jason tense beside me. This could have been his story if we hadn't caught Emily when we did. On the 5th day of trial, Agent Foster took the stand to describe the criminal network Emily had been part of. The organization operates like a franchise, Foster explained. They have scouts who identify targets, operators like Ms. Sullivan who execute the scams, and money launderers who help hide the stolen assets. Ms. Sullivan was one of their most successful operators. How successful? Chen asked. Over 4 years, Ms. Sullivan personally stole approximately $400,000 from victims. She received a 30% commission on every theft. The jury looked shocked. Emily had been making over $30,000 per year just from destroying people's lives. But the most devastating testimony came from David Kim, Emily's first husband. She was perfect, David said from the witness stand. Everything I had ever wanted in a partner. She was interested in my family's restaurant. She seemed to understand the pressures of running a small business, and she made me feel like I could share anything with her. How long did this period last? Chen asked. About 6 months. Then, gradually, things started to change. She began criticizing how I managed the restaurant, suggesting that I wasn't ambitious enough, that I was letting family loyalty hold me back financially. Can you be more specific? She convinced me that my elderly father was a burden on the business, that we needed to make changes to be more profitable. When my father became ill and needed expensive medical care, Emily suggested that maybe it was time for him to step back from the restaurant. David's voice broke. I actually considered it. I was so in love with her that I almost chose her over my own father. Jason grabbed my hand. I could tell he was seeing himself in David's story. What happened next? Chen asked. My father died before I made any decisions about the restaurant. Emily was very supportive during the funeral. She helped me handle all the arrangements, but when the will was read and I inherited full ownership of the restaurant, she suddenly became very interested in modernizing our business model. What did that involve? She wanted me to take out a business loan using the restaurant as collateral. She said we could expand to multiple locations, maybe even franchise the concept. It sounded exciting. Did you take out the loan? Yes, $60,000. Emily handled most of the paperwork because she said she had business experience. David described how Emily disappeared 2 weeks after the loan was approved, taking most of the money and leaving him with crushing debt that forced him to sell the restaurant his family had owned for 20 years. The worst part, David concluded, wasn't losing the money. It was realizing that everything I thought we shared was a lie. Every conversation, every intimate moment, every time she said she loved me, it was all part of the plan to steal from me. When it came time for Emily to testify in her own defense, she took a different approach than I had expected. Instead of maintaining her innocence, she admitted to the crimes, but claimed she had been coerced by the network's leadership. I never wanted to hurt anyone, she said, crying on the witness stand. But when you're trapped in this kind of organization, they don't give you choices. They threatened my family, my safety, everything I cared about. Rebecca Walsh guided Emily through a story about being recruited by the network when she was young and desperate, gradually being forced into more serious crimes until she felt she had no way out. Ms. Sullivan, Walsh asked, did you ever try to leave the organization? Many times, but they have ways of making sure you stay. They know things about you, they have compromising information, and they make it clear that leaving isn't an option. It was a compelling performance, but Chen's cross-examination exposed the holes in her story. Ms. Sullivan, you claim you were forced to commit these crimes, but isn't it true that you received a 30% commission on every theft? Yes, but... And isn't it true that you purchased a $45,000 BMW with money stolen from Michael Torres? Yes, but they told me I had to maintain a certain image to be convincing. Did they force you to buy designer clothes and jewelry with your victim's money? Emily's composure finally cracked. You don't understand. I earned that money. Do you know how hard it is to pretend to love someone you despise? Do you know what it's like to have to sleep next to someone night after night, pretending they matter to you? The courtroom was silent. Emily had just admitted that she despised her victims, that every moment of intimacy had been a calculated performance. Jason leaned over and whispered, I'm glad I found out who she really was before I married her. But as I looked at Emily breaking down on the witness stand, I felt something unexpected, pity. Not for the criminal she had become, but for whatever had happened to her to make her capable of such cruelty. Justice was coming. But I was beginning to understand that punishment might not be the same thing as healing. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours. When they returned to the courtroom at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday, exactly 6 months after the night Jason threw me out of my house, their faces were grim and determined. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Patricia Williams asked. We have, Your Honor, the foreman replied. On the charge of conspiracy to commit mail fraud, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of wire fraud, guilty. 14 charges, 14 guilty verdicts. Emily Sullivan would spend the next 8 to 12 years in federal prison. When the judge read the sentence, Emily collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Her attorney rubbed her back, but there was nothing left to do. The evidence had been overwhelming. Her own testimony had contradicted her defense, and the jury had seen through every manipulation attempt. Ms. Sullivan, Judge Williams said, you have systematically destroyed families and stolen people's life savings for your own gain. The court sentences you to 10 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You will also pay restitution to all identified victims in the amount of $387,000. As the bailiff led Emily away in handcuffs, she turned to look at Jason one last time. Her expression wasn't remorseful. It was angry, as if she couldn't understand why her manipulation hadn't worked. Jason didn't look away. Goodbye, Emily, he said quietly. Outside the courthouse, Agent Foster found us on the steps. Mrs. Burke, Mr. Burke, I wanted to thank you both. Your courage in coming forward has led to the arrest of 4 other network members. We've recovered almost $200,000 in stolen assets that will be returned to victims. What happens to the network now? I asked. It's essentially destroyed. Emily was their most successful operator, and her conviction has caused the whole organization to collapse. Some members have fled the country, but we're working with international law enforcement to track them down. Jason shook Agent Foster's hand. Thank you for believing us, for taking this seriously. Thank you for fighting back. Most victims never recover from this kind of manipulation, financially or emotionally. You two did something extraordinary. As Agent Foster walked away, Jason and I stood on the courthouse steps, looking out at the Tampa skyline. It was a beautiful December afternoon, warm and sunny, nothing like the humid evening 6 months ago when this nightmare had begun. Mom, Jason said, I know we've talked about this before, but I need to say it again. I am so sorry for what I did to you, for the things I said, for throwing you out of your own home, for choosing Emily over the woman who sacrificed everything for me. I had been preparing for this moment, thinking about what I wanted to say when justice was finally served. Jason, Emily was a professional criminal who spent months planning how to destroy our family. You were her victim just as much as I was. But I still made those choices. Emily might have manipulated me, but I was the one who said those horrible things to you. I looked at my son, 47 years old now, grayer than he had been 6 months ago, but wiser too. You're right. You did make those choices, and I'm not going to pretend that forgetting them is the same thing as forgiving them. But Jason, We have two options. We can let Emily's poison continue to destroy our relationship, or we can choose to build something stronger than what we had before. I want to build something stronger, but Mom, I don't know how to earn back your trust. I reached into my purse and pulled out a legal document that Patricia Morrison had prepared the week before. What's this? Jason asked. It's the deed to the house. I'm signing it back over to you. Jason's eyes widened. Mom, no. After everything I did, Jason, I'm 68 years old. I don't need a big house anymore, but you do. And more importantly, I need you to have the chance to prove that you've learned from this experience. But what if I mess up again? What if I make more stupid decisions? Then you'll have to live with the consequences, just like any adult. But Jason, I can't protect you from making mistakes for the rest of your life. What I can do is show you that I believe in your ability to learn from this one. Jason took the deed with trembling hands. There are conditions, aren't there? I smiled. Oh, yes. First, you're going to pay me rent. Not much, $500 a month, but enough to remind both of us that nothing in life is free. That's fair. Second, every Sunday you're coming to dinner. Not at your house, at mine. I'm getting a little apartment near downtown, and you're going to help me cook and clean up afterward. I'd like that. And third, if you ever, and I mean ever, let another woman convince you to choose between her and your family, I will personally hunt you down and make Emily Sullivan look like an amateur. Jason laughed, the first genuine laugh I had heard from him in months. Deal. Mom, can I ask you something? Anything. Are you happy with how this turned out? I thought about the question seriously. 6 months ago, I had been a naive woman who trusted too easily and loved too unconditionally. Emily's betrayal had shattered my faith in people and forced me to confront some hard truths about my own relationship with my son. But it had also revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed. I had fought back against someone who tried to destroy my family. I had helped bring down a criminal organization. I had learned that love without boundaries isn't love, it's enabling. Jason, I'm not happy that any of this happened, but I'm proud of how we handled it, and I'm hopeful about what we can build together going forward. As we walked to our cars, Jason turned back to me one more time. Mom, I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. But next time, show it by trusting the woman who raised you instead of the woman who's trying to use you. He nodded. There won't be a next time. Good. Because Emily Sullivan is in prison, but Margaret Burke is still watching. And that's my story. How my son's betrayal became the catalyst for the strongest our relationship has ever been. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the thing that saves you. Emily thought she could destroy my family, but she actually taught us how to rebuild it on a foundation of truth instead of blind trust. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And leave me a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love hearing from people all over the world who understand that sometimes justice takes time, but it always finds a way. Remember, family is supposed to lift you up, not tear you down. And if someone asks you to choose between them and the people who truly love you, choose carefully, because that choice will define who you really are. Thanks for listening to Margaret's story. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's showing the people who tried to destroy you that you're stronger than they ever imagined.